This is the Mind Body Detox Podcast, where we discuss all things integrative health and wellness, interviewing folks from all over the world, sharing insights and wisdom for how to live a healthier life in mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back, everyone, to the Mind Body Detox Podcast. I'm your host, Mind Body Medium, Kara Lovehart. And today's topic, we're going to be diving into consciousness. We're talking about the ego, and we're bringing on my partner and preacher of presence, Matt Suter, and we're discussing specifically the topic of consciousness and the ego around the book by Eckhart Tolle, A New Earth. So New Earth is our book for November's book club. It is Awakening to Your Life's Purpose. This is the first Eckhart Tolle book I ever purchased, and I bought it around 2006 when probably 2008, because it has Oprah Winfrey's book club sticker on it. This was published in 2006. Eckhart Tolle did not become famous until 2008 when she chose his book for her book club. So if you are not aware of who Eckhart Tolle is, he had a spiritual awakening when he was 29. He suffered from immense depression, and he started to recognize the difference between his mind and a deeper sense of awareness. And this is the essence that I talk about in my program or my classes, the divine us, if you want to speak, the thing that is greater than the ego. And this is really what, when people say they have a spiritual awakening, a lot of them discuss or a lot of people who say they have a spiritual awakening start to have this deeper sense of who they are and a deeper meaning that comes out from that. The book in general, if you have not read it, it does talk about the power of the present moment. The Power of Now is Eckhart Tolle's other book. That is a more popular book. And he does talk about ego. He talks about the evolution of consciousness. And that's specifically what I'm curious about as we evolve as a species, how our consciousness has traversed. And especially over COVID, we have a lot of people who've had their own personal awakenings. In the book, we also hear a lot of letting go. How do we let go of attachment? And the concept of inner versus outer reality. So what is an illusion based on the stories we tell ourselves or what we think about because our programming or what we've been told. So there's a lot of these concepts that are discussed in the book. And Earth as a living entity herself. So that's a really cool thing that is talked about in the book. But today, we're going to bring on Matt, my partner, and we're going to talk about the book, A New Earth, and our own experiences with consciousness, evolving our own consciousness, and some specific questions that people often ask around the book and this topic. So Matt is an astrologer. He is an intuitive coach, and he is a minister, and he is someone that is a student of Eckhart Tolle and a preacher of presence, as I call him. So let's bring Matt on and let's chat about A New Earth. Hi, Matt.
Hi there.
Are you ready to talk about A New Earth?
Absolutely.
So first off, my question to you is, did you read this book after you read The Power of Now?
I did, yes. The Power of Now was the first book by Eckhart Tolle that I ever read. But yes, A New Earth was the second one that I read.
Okay, cool. So one of the things that I will have to say, to be honest, it's almost like what's interesting about this book and a lot of Eckhart Tolle's books is not everyone resonates with them. They might pick it up and go, okay, this is everyone loves this book. Everyone says I should read it. And I pick it up and it's a snoozer, or I can't get through it, or I'm not interested in it at all. And I hear that all the time. And I feel that when I picked up The Power of Now, I felt the same way about that book. Mm-hmm. Like I really didn't have any interest in it. And I'm actually opening the book right now because there's something that was really interesting to me that I want to start with and open with about this information. And it makes sense to me now as to why I was not interested in this. So if you out there, you picked up the book or any of Eckhart Tolle's book, or you listen to him and you're just like, I just can't get into this guy. Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting concept. I'm going to share this right now. This is page 6. This book's main purpose is not to add new information or beliefs to your mind, or try to convince you of anything, but to bring about a shift in consciousness, that is to say, to awaken. So most of the time we're used to consuming media, maybe even this podcast, books, TV shows to get more mental information, concepts, stories, things that we want to maybe apply and start believing in.
Right.
But the concept of his teachings is not to bring in any new beliefs or add new information, but to help you awaken from the stories, from the constructs of the identity of who you think you are, which is based on all these stories you've collected since you were a child, since you were born, to awaken you from and above that. So you can almost evolve or transcend above and beyond that. So what do you think about that?
It's perfectly embodied, in my opinion, in some of the Zen sermons that the Zen masters used to give, where they would simply raise a finger to answer a question, and everyone would wait with bated breath for the enlightening, answer to come through. But it was about the silence. It was about the stillness. It was about understanding that everything was already here that you needed. All the answers had already been given, that the only thing that was out of harmony with now was the story you were telling yourself about how now was supposed to look. And so indeed, Eckhart's books will give you plenty of examples. You'll get a lot of perspectives and stories, and he even pulls from familiar theologies of Christianity and Buddhism and some other folk tales of things to illustrate the same concept. The idea that by adding information, we're only feeding into the part of ourselves, or what we've identified as ourselves, that we are trying to overcome through this process, that we're trying to disidentify by, that we can be conscious of without it becoming a part of who we are.
So it makes sense, though, why if you have a very active identity, lots of inner chatter, lots of inner dialogue, you go, you're fast paced, and you don't have, your ego and identity hasn't been shaken up enough, meaning you've had a huge life change. You've lost a job, you've lost something that you've held on to as a sense of who you think you are. And it's been, the rug has been pulled out from underneath of you, so to speak. If you haven't had that experience where there's enough of a window or maybe a door like cracked open to have this sense of the awareness that's beyond your story. Oh, just the person that observes without, I am this old, this is my job, this is my husband or wife. I don't think unless you have those experiences that there may be a computing what the heck this is. The
Sure.
ego and the story is just going to be like, okay, whatever. So
because the moment now threatens the ego. The ego can't exist in this moment. It's essentially like us trying to go underwater. Like we can be there for a moment, but we have to do it with an awareness that we need to get back up to the surface, that we need to get back to the thing that we were in before. The ego can only exist in those stories. So when we bring our awareness to now, there's no information to chew on unless we add something to now. And for us to say, well, I think this is good, or I think this is bad, if we're going to add a judgment, or, oh, yes, I've experienced this before. I was with my uncle when I did this and that and the other. And then all of a sudden we've added this life story to it. Essentially, we're trying to take this and personalize it. Oh, yes, I know about this. Yes, I have experienced it. Or this is new to me, or this is scary to me, or this is whatever we do. We put the sense of self into the whole thing. And again, to borrow a Buddhist phrase, no self, no problem. And so if we can disidentify from those stories, then all of a sudden it's not about entertaining ourselves, but experiencing what's going on rather than needing more to engage with some sense of this hunger essentially within ourselves that our ego has.
Well, my ego just went on a weird tangent in my head while you were talking. I was looking at the bookshelf behind you, and I know that's actually not a real bookshelf. You have a green screen behind you.
I do.
And then I was thinking to myself, is this your real bookshelf that you have upstairs?
No.
Oh my gosh. Because I was like, some of these books I think you have. And I was just like,
maybe.
So that's what the ego wants to do. If it's bored with something, or something you're telling. And I don't think I was necessarily bored with what you were saying. I actually was just distracted by there's information back there. What is going on?
You slipped into unconsciousness. Yes, you slipped in because conscious awareness would be present with what's going on. But the unconscious mind says, what do those books say? Have I read that book before? Has he read that book before? Is that even his bookshelf? I think that's completely fake. That's not even real. And
Yes.
I know that now. And that makes me better than the situation because I'm in the right. Now that I know what's actually going on, I'm not silly enough to believe that sort of thing. I'm not gullible. You know, the ego wants to personalize the story.
Well, so that one thing too about the book, if you are someone that couldn't read it or you put it down and you're hearing us say, well, you're not going to get it. If you're hearing us say you're not going to get it if your ego's in the driver's seat.
Yeah, no, you
I can
will
see,
get it.
but I can hear it now. I can hear it now. Someone's identity saying, what do you mean I'm not awakened enough to understand this information? Like,
But
can you even that
is
voice, that thought is the actual identity that's keeping you away from your true essence of who you are.
And more importantly, your true essence is the thing recognizing it. So give yourself that space to say, here comes that voice again. It's telling me this story, because what you're doing is the same thing that Eckhart did when he had this whole awakening, where he was so depressed, he was feeling suicidal. And he said, I can't live with myself anymore. And for whatever reason, that phrasing queued up the question in his mind, well, who is the me that can't live with myself? That means there must be two versions of me. And that was essentially the disidentification. It only happened momentarily. And he talks about how it was a gradual process. And he still slipped back and forth through the time after that, following that. And so when we step into these spaces where we can identify the thought pattern that's coming in, at that moment, we are conscious. This thought is coming in. This feeling is coming in. This old pattern is coming up again in me. And see how long you can remain conscious of the pattern, of the thought, of the situation, without assuming that it's the same situation as before, the same thought as before, the same feeling as before. You know, we have a habit of saying, oh, I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling happy, or we label things with these simple emotions. But ultimately, there's so much complexity that's happening behind the scenes that's evoking that emotion in us. And so when we try to put it into that box, ultimately we're saying, this is mine, I own this, and I understand what this is. But if we are open and saying, there is sadness in me, there is happiness in me, we are acknowledging that we are the container, the vaster openness, the sky in which those clouds pass through, rather than identifying by the cloud and saying, this is me, this is my story.
Okay, so let's define the ego, but wait 1 second. We're going to talk about what the ego is. And trust me, guys, the ego is not the enemy. Okay, no. That is one thing that everyone's like, well, I got to get rid of my ego. And now I'm going to have no personality. And so like, just don't even go there. Don't even go there with your head. It's not about getting rid of it. All of Eckhart's teachers aren't about, we need to beat the ego. That is another story. But we're going to first talk about Eckhart's definition of collective insanity. Mm-hmm. Okay. I really loved this, especially when he was reading it. I was in the shower. I was like laughing hysterically because I was like, this is exactly a really good illustration of what it is. So he talks about collective insanity is really just when we have all these stories running the show, you know, the decisions that are made to kind of protect ourselves or our sense of identity, and how the wars and the things that we do individually in our lives to people around us unconsciously, and sometimes maybe consciously, right? But it's all still trying to preserve, you know, us and our ego. But this also happens collectively with wars and things like that. So I'm going to read what he said here. If the history of humanity were the clinical case history of a single human being, the diagnosis would have to be chronic paranoid delusions, a pathological propensity to commit murder and acts of extreme violence, and cruelty against his perceived, quote-unquote, enemies, his own unconsciousness projected outward, criminally insane with a few brief lucid intervals. So let's just talk about that, because people might be like thinking, I'm not paranoid delusional. I don't have a pathological propensity to commit murder and acts of extreme violence. What are they talking about? I don't relate to that. Mm-hmm. So go ahead.
So the idea of Eckhart normally will reference this equation, normal equals insane. And he says that because ultimately what we dictate as normal is the result of a collective ego, of a collective illusion that we're saying that ultimately, if you approach someone else, anyone else, and when you meet them, the story about them precedes what's going on with them now, then you've bought into that collective insanity. So if you look into the world at anyone and by someone, the way that they dress, any of the visual cues that we normally depend upon as human animals, if that is our point of identification with someone else, we've bought into that collective insanity. The thing that says you need to watch out for these people because they do this. But whenever they do that, that labeling ultimately negates everything else that they do and only focuses on the thing that is a perceived threat. So I would venture to say that we can only experience that in unconsciousness, because when we are conscious, we understand the interconnectedness, if not the unification of all things. And therefore, a wrong perpetuated upon you is a wrong perpetuated upon me. But as a collective identity, we are looking for a tribe. We're looking for the bigger group, the people that are going to say, yes, you're right because you believe what I believe. That's the normal equals insane.
So we'll talk about my insanity the other day. I was at the mall, and normally when I'm in my kind of expanded state of awareness, I see people as an energy. I see them as different colors, and everyone has different flavors. And it's just, that's how it is. It's beautiful. But when I'm retracted, when I'm in a space of more stress or my heightened stress response, that's when my animal brain will start to kick in, and the collective, the unconscious starts to step into the driver's seat, and the collective ego and the stereotypes and the things the collective believes, that's when I start to slip into them. And there was a family at the mall, and for some reason I was looking over in the food court at this family, and it was a woman, she was pregnant, and her 2 children walking with her and the husband. And something about the husband, the way he was dressed, the way he was carrying himself, and this type of clothing he was wearing, the brand of clothing he was wearing, my unconscious immediately started to retract my body, and I didn't feel safe. And I was like, I don't know about that person over there. But then I recognized that I was being unconscious, and I go, oh, it's just because I saw these movies that said the character that looks like this and has this type of clothing and brand, and also how they're carrying themselves. Now, to be fair, there are actual truths to stereotypes in a lot of ways. Yes. In a lot of ways, it's not like don't listen to your intuition about something, but it's just becoming aware in that moment. Is this actually true? Is my feeling body, my felt sense, my internal intuition really feeling this person isn't safe? Because it could be the same person. They could look like a stereotypical safe person, person's a monk or whatever. And they could still not be a safe person when it comes to our physical safety. But it's about determining and stepping into consciousness. So I really...
And also conscious awareness is also not focused on what does this have to do with me? Because your unconscious personalized that situation where you saw that person who was not interacting with you directly, and you determined whether or not they were a good guy or a bad guy, whether they were okay or they weren't okay. And while that is okay, don't let that be their identity. That's essentially the role that consciousness plays, that we can be conscious of our bias, and that is indeed our unconscious mind, that we can be conscious that that's there and that it may very well try to influence our decisions. But as long as we keep our awareness on it, it can't pull us into unconsciousness as long as we maintain that centered awareness.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to do a quote here from the book. It is... One quote here is, life will give you whatever experience is the most helpful for the evolution of your consciousness. And if you believe that and you look at the experiences you have in your life from that lens, I think it's absolutely beautiful, because then you're taking away this consciousness of being a victim, right, and looking at how can whatever's happening to you or whatever's currently happened, you can make a different choice in that present moment to do something different. So what do you have to say about that? Anything you want to say about that quote?
Yeah, the only time you can make a different choice is when you are conscious, because unconsciousness ultimately will only repeat itself because its interest is in satiating familiarity. It wants to stick with the devil that it knows, to use another phrase. The idea that that sense of what you know is what you'll keep choosing unless you are aware that, hey, wait a minute, I'm driving through an intersection again. I have the opportunity to turn. And so again, any moment that you lose consciousness, that you say, oh man, I just blew through that intersection, you've become aware again. Now try and maintain that awareness rather than getting caught in the story of what would have happened if you hadn't blown through that intersection.
I feel like driving right now is my biggest presence practice, because, years and years of doing internal awareness work and continuing to become more aware of my physical body, my essence, who I am, getting rid of the stories. I mean, really, it's Mind Body Detox is my lifestyle, the program. And the biggest foundational pivot point for that program in people's lives is the self-awareness tools. So we start to become aware of our programs, and then we start to detox them. We start to get them out of the way. And really, that's part of awakening. So the question we kind of have next is, what does awakening really mean in practical terms, and how can I experience it in my everyday life? So my example here is, years of doing this type of work, becoming aware what I'm doing, what I'm saying, and it not being from a sense of trying to protect myself or protect my identity or my reputation or things like that. And not that those things don't still happen. It's just becoming aware of them. And for years, I would compare myself to Matt, because I'd be like, he is so present. Like, he's so peaceful. You had a lot more practice than I did, but my ego is still driving me nuts because it's comparing myself and creating suffering and judgment of me, of myself, and that I'm not enough. And I think this happens too often in people who are on a spiritual path, because then there's an end point or some sort of finish line thought form of like, this is the goal when I'm spiritually to the end or at the best or whatever. It creates this weird thing. But now my main points that pull me into unconsciousness are things that threaten my physical security and safety as a body. Like when I'm driving and someone cuts me off, that's when I'll feel it. I'll get heightened in my nervous system, my stress response, my chest will get tight. And then for a quick second, I go, what are they doing? And I start to move into that story, and that voice starts to talk. It happened 3 times to me today. There were people that were pulling out, merging onto Queen Street from the highway when I was going past the bridge to go to Safe and Sweet Keto Bakery, right over there. And the person just didn't even stop. They just were getting on as I'm going by. And I was very confused. But what was really cool is that my normal response when I go into unconsciousness is fight. Normally, like, what the heck? Or I'll curse at them in my car. And I, of course, feel guilty about that. And again, the ego is feeling guilty about cursing. Like, that was bad. That was a bad decision versus a good decision, right?
Something new to hold on to.
Yeah, exactly. Another story, which is, another thing to go on. But instead, it was really interesting. I think my nervous system went into freeze. Like, as they kind of went around me, I slowed the car down. I had gone around them, and my son was in the car, and Orion was like, why are you slowing down? Like I was going to stop, because I kept looking at them in the rearview mirror, confused as to what was going on. And then I laughed and shook it off. And because that's what happens to your physical nervous system, because they say that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. I would differ to say that we are spiritual beings having an animal experience, because we're also animals. Like, the animalistic part of our brain, when we're threatened of our physical safety for our lives, is going to kick on. And you can practice to be present, and like martial artists and people do this to get in these extreme situations that you can keep your mind calm in the face of your life being threatened. But there is still anybody, to any degree of their spiritual awakening, may still get caught in that. And that's okay. I think it's just, that's why I'm learning so many tools to help down regulate and continue to work on that trauma response, which is what I teach. And most of the course for Mind Body Detox is teaching those tools. So
Eckhart actually talks about that in the book. He speaks about ducks on a pond, the idea that another duck invades that duck's space, and then they go at it for a second, and then they go separate directions and they shake themselves off. and then they just swim around like nothing ever happened, that they've discharged the energy of that confrontation and they've returned back to their existence.
And that's what I did today. I slowed down, and I was going to stop. And I recognized, like, why am I slowing down? And I was like, oh my gosh. And I laughed so hard because I was like, that's so fun. Like my autonomic system is just doing it. It takes over. And then when I laughed, it was shaking my nervous system, just like that response, and shaking it off. And then I went about my day. So what to you, because awakening in practical terms, like in everyday, day-to-day life experience, what does it look like?
It looks the same as someone who has been sleepwalking, waking up and realizing they're standing in the kitchen in the middle of the night holding an oar and a toilet brush. You know, you can find yourself in strange surroundings doing strange things. But the moment that you acknowledge that you're no longer aware of how you ended up where you are, you have become conscious. You have awoken in that moment. And ultimately, it's something that I like to tell people when it comes to this concept of awakening or enlightenment, that enlightenment is not where you park your car, it's how you drive. It's a constant awareness. It's a constant practice. If I could say a word 1 billion times, it would be practice, because we have this mentality, especially in our culture, that we need to achieve something. And the moment that we achieve it, we move on past it because it no longer provides us with worth. It's almost the achieving process that becomes the value. And if we look a little deeper, we realize that that is the ego. The ego is a story that we've confused for ourselves. So ultimately, when that ego comes up and says you need to continue to move forward, you're not awoken yet. You didn't awaken. You're not enlightened. Or I am enlightened. I finally achieved it. And anybody who tells me I'm not enlightened, they just aren't enlightened enough to realize it. You know, they just need to do what I say because I'm enlightened. You know, these are all stories that the ego is telling us. So enlightenment or awakening in this particular terminology has very little to signify what's going on inside, outside, aside from less noise. The more that we awaken, the less we resist what is going on right now. And the more we participate in what is going on right now. That's really, if you want to distill it down, it's the level of your conscious involvement in what is happening in this moment. That's what awakening looks like.
So now I'm just going to say, from a place of what does awakening look like in practical terms, my example of it is you become more aware of not only yourself, but the things around you, stripped down from the illusions of what you thought they were. And one of those things is our sense of perception. Now, not everybody's awakening journey is, maybe not everyone's consciousness has any interest in becoming more intuitive, but intuition to me is just really seeing things for the truth of what they are. Like if you can see someone has a facade up, this is for me as an intuitive and as a clairvoyant, when you see someone's facade up of who they think they are and the identity they're trying to project, basically their ego. For most of my life, I was confused because I saw past that and I see who they really are. And, you know, when people tell you this is what I'm doing or this is who I am, and it doesn't align up, and then you find out later, you know, you were correct. You know, you can get that sense in your body. You can get a sense in your mind. You can get a thought. You can hear a word. I think when you expand your consciousness and you're awakening to more of the truth of what's around you and what's in you, that to me is what consciousness is. And it's not something that's an end done be all. Like as I continue on my journey in my life, I have more of my senses that start to expand. And I love Eckhart Tolle talks about that people get lost in the psychic abilities and the healing abilities, because I've seen that when I was practicing, maybe it's been 8 years now, that people would call me, and it was weird. They'd call me on the phone to schedule a massage at our clinic. And they just happened to have to say, did you know that I'm a psychic medium? Like there's something really important that I need to know about that for them to see someone for a massage. It's just like someone calling me up to get a massage and saying, oh, by the way, I want to let you know that I'm a school principal. Okay, well, maybe we could ask you that at your intake paperwork because we want to know what you do. So if it relates to your body and it being used or over and over again, or injuries, but I noticed that there becomes, and especially now after 2020, this great awakening, which I could say the great trauma that caused the identity shifts and the identity breaking down of people who they think they were. People died, they lost their jobs, all this stuff. Perfect recipe for shattering the ego and breaking it apart to pieces. But that process isn't done yet. So there is now this reshifting to people sensing more things, having their intuition get turned on, discovering that they're also a medium. I believe that expanding your consciousness, having those things happen to you, are just the natural part of the process. It's not something special or something your ego could start to create a label around, and this is special and I'm so cool and I'm the highest downloaded information psychic being that there is, or I can heal people. People get really stuck in that story, it seems. And I think for a while it bothered my ego. Like it triggered me because I felt now I'm just like, well, that's part of the process for them. But there's nothing wrong with that.
And you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's part of my
It's the
process.
universe bringing to you exactly what you need right now.
Let's read it again. Life will give you whatever experience is the most helpful for your evolution of your consciousness. Thank you, universe. Like it really, truly is. Like I just have love
ultimately,
for them.
having two people sitting on a park bench, one who is colorblind, one who is not, perceiving the beauty of the forest, it's irrelevant whether or not they can see those colors. Because if they are truly being present with it, if they are truly experiencing the beauty that is that moment, no matter whether they have one sense or 20,000 senses, they are still utilizing those senses for that purpose. Anything else is a false sense of self that we've created an ego identity around. Yes, absolutely.
And I guess the beauty of expanding your consciousness to having these healing capacities is you really can have your own personal experience of healing, because Eckhart Tolle talks about the pain body and different parts of our belief systems. And this could be the mind-body connection that we're a lot more science behind, which science is another construct of the ego that needs to prove something to be real in our society. And it's not real unless science proves it. But if you want that, if your mental body likes that, there is science now to prove the mind-body connection. But Eckhart Tolle is talking about, our nervous system and our immune system are so interconnected to the things we're thinking and the stress. And you can have these spontaneous healings or quote unquote miraculous healings. Who knows what really miracles are? And if we don't, if we have a mental construct around what they are, if they're real or they're not, then you might be limiting the potential truth that of actually what that could be or what it maybe isn't. And I think that's really the ticket. This practical awakening in everyday life is using the tools that are brought to you. Like life brings things to you. It's a flow. And it might start with this particular modality or mindfulness or food. And that's what we work with in the Mind Body Detox program. It's like there's so many tools and all of them are to be utilized with when you're at, when you feel called to them. And they help you bring more self-awareness in. So what are your thoughts on the pandemic and that forcing people to wake up? Do you think it's been more of an awakening process with that? Or do you think it's caused even more distraction?
I think that we seldom awaken from inside of our comfort zone. And so anything that pushes us into unfamiliar territory presents us with the extraordinary opportunity to be mindful. It's the reason why a lot of people do thrill-seeking things like riding roller coasters or jumping out of airplanes or all those sorts of things. Because when you're in that intense energy, you are primally conscious of what's going on. You can watch a cat staring at a hole in the wall where the mouse comes out. It's not anticipating, when the mouse comes out, it's going to be so good. I'm going to catch it with my left paw and I'm going to bite its head. And then it's going to be, my dinner and I play around with it. It doesn't create a story. It's just watching. And so when the pandemic came around, when people had to stay inside, when they had to disconnect from their routines, from the things that they had identified by, perhaps, that they had created this identity around. It pushed some people further into unconsciousness because they ruminated, because they stayed in that space. And that's okay, because ultimately that helps to move them towards the potential for them to realize they're blowing through an intersection. And sometimes life has to T-bone you as you blow through that intersection in order for you to realize it. But that's neither here nor there. And then there are other people who also did have that shell get cracked, who did look into that void and understand that they are playing just as much a part in the unfolding of this process as anyone or anything else. And ultimately what it is trying to unify and harmonize yourself with what life is doing rather than trying to get life to conform to your will. This is the eternal battle of the ego that says, no, 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 this soup isn't hot enough. Send it back. As opposed to saying, oh, I'm sorry, could you bring me a bowl of hot soup, please? We have to identify and personalize all of these things in order for the ego to survive. So the less we make it about me, the less we make it about how I feel about it, or what I think about it, or what my opinion is. That's my favorite sports team, or that's my favorite political party. The more we identify by these things, we have these opportunities pass us by. But all of it is within our control. The only thing that we can, which is what we pay attention to, where we put our focus. And if we put it on what's going on now, whether it's a traffic jam or another pandemic, we receive the equal opportunity to pay attention to what's going on, to not add anything to this moment. That becomes the practice. How would you experience this moment if you added nothing to it? It's quiet. No one is here. I don't have to go to work today. There's a check coming for me in the mail. I have to do what? Go about my business, right? It's a regular day. The sun came up and it'll go down, and you can go about your day, even though you can't go about your routine, the things that you're telling yourself you should be doing, you should be able to do. And then I feel bad because I'm not working. And what if this goes on forever? And how will I pay for it? You see, the story starts and it pulls us out of what's going on. So regardless of what the situation in the third dimensional world, we have an equal opportunity within that present moment to choose awareness. And if we miss it this moment, don't worry, the next moment is going to present us with that same opportunity.
So one of the books that we read last year was The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. Mm-hmm. And another book that he wrote that I really love, I actually like this book a lot better, is The Surrender Experiment. Mm-hmm. So in that book, if you have read that, or if you haven't, I encourage you to pick it up. He is a living example of what Matt's talking about. He basically he experienced bliss through meditation and yogic experience, and he just wanted to go back to that. That was his end goal. Like, I just want that. I don't care if I'm a tenured professor anymore. Like, he didn't care, but life kept bringing him all these opportunities, and he made a commitment to say, I'm just going to let go and I'm going to surrender, and whatever is brought to me, I'll meditate on it. And if I'm feeling, I don't want to do it, I'm still going to do it, because I'm just surrendering to life. I'm just surrendering. And his whole experience just became this one sequence of events after another that led to him and his life path, and how, life flowed through him when he let go of his identity. Was he all of a sudden had a carpentry cut business, and it was doing all this work and big work. And then all of a sudden he owned a computer tech company all of a sudden, and he didn't ever think he would get into computers. And then it was a multi-million-dollar company, and now he has retreats and books, and he's a teacher, and he's not someone that has this desire to do these things. He's like, all I wanted to do was meditate and be by myself. He was kind of annoyed. He says, there's a part of me that's annoyed by it, that part of his identity, his ego, but he still is just letting life happen through him. And I would say anyone out there that once you finally let go, once you finally surrender, that's what really, when things start to go right. So our law of attraction in action class, because everyone loves the law of attraction, right? I teach in that course how to use the chakra system or the energy body to clear out things, like Eckhart Tolle would call it the pain body, because that's a lot of time what's in the way to manifesting. And a lot of times our ego has an idea of what we want to manifest, right? It thinks of this is that, and I'm going to do this because I want to be here or there. In the course, I talk about what is it really your soul wants to manifest, because that's more fulfilling than anything that your ego could come up with. And so we go through that. And then the final process, here's the spoiler alert, the biggest thing, if you do all those steps, which is helpful to do all those steps, to help, get rid of that, the stories that are blocking your actual true purpose of what you want to be doing. But then it's letting go. Like you can do all the steps, you can map it out, you can make vision boards all day long. You got to let it go. Just like a one friend of ours who was dating people and trying to find this right person. And they're just like, just one person after the other. And then they just said, and I said to him, I think once you give up, you're going to find the one. I really do. Because that's how it works with everything. You've been trying to look for a job, can't find one, you give up, there the job comes. And just rightfully so, he gave up and then he found the love of his life. And that was the best wedding I've ever been to in my life. You were there. You married them. So it's crazy to me that is always the answer. Letting go and surrendering. And always. What are we letting go of? I think that concept is, what do I let go? How do I let go? How do I let go? The mental body, the ego is so active. Because 10 years ago, when people tell me I need to learn to let go, because I could say I'm a recovering type A, they're hold on to everything. I didn't know how. I kept asking how. It's like I needed a new thought form to jump into, because if I'm mad at this person, I need to figure out what else to think so I don't keep thinking that thought, and I don't even know how to let go of it because it keeps coming back to that. And now it's a new story. So then I reverted to, well, if I can't let go and I can't control anything, maybe I'll just control my body. I can totally relax my lungs and collapse my body like a rag doll. That's what I have control over. That was my insanity process of trying to figure out how to let go. Now, those techniques I find very helpful for clients who are like, I don't know how to let go. I'm like, try just knowing that you have control of your hand right now. You can relax your hand. Because I think what I've found in the practical application of this method, if you want to call it a method, the beingness, I think it's challenging to try to clear your mind and be self-aware when you are in fight, flight, fawn, or freeze or trauma response, because just physiologically how the brain works, you're activating this old part of the brain that is helping you try to stay alive. And it's when we perpetuate the story of whatever just happened to us that we, continue to create the suffering. But I know so many people and myself for years that struggled, you being my measuring stick to my ego. I'm trying to find peace like Matt, and honestly, until I figured out it's not in my mind, I thought I was going to think my way out of it. I was going to find a new book or a new way or method. And of course, Mind Body Detox helped so much. And you know why the difference between that and any other mental process book media out there is because it had tools to actually down-regulate the stress response in the body enough so that thinking mind that could discern, the observer that could make a decision and say, I'm not going to choose to think that, or I'm going to let that go. That part was so in the background. And I don't think it could come on because the ego, not only the mental body wanted to protect itself, but I think the physical form, the ego in its physical form, so it doesn't die, was just chronically in this stress. So I feel like I want to say that because some people get so frustrated with themselves of trying to wake up or trying to be present or trying to be peaceful. And I think that they're sometimes going about it in a wrong way. You can't think your way out of it. You might need to use some tool, maybe even someone else giving you body work or Reiki for a period of time, so you have a reference point of what it feels like to be relaxed. Because if you don't have a reference point to be relaxed or be calm, or you're not going to be able to meditate. You're going to just,
Well, I think that it's important to remember that the intention of being present is not about clearing your mind, but rather identifying the fact that you are not your mind. You are not your thoughts. You are not the things that are telling you whether this is a good moment or a bad moment, whether you're a good meditator or a bad meditator, whether you've achieved it, whether you have to keep your eyes closed and sit like this for another 5 minutes, or whatever the story might be that's going on in your head. However you are experiencing the practice of awakening is exactly right. There is no wrong way. And the more that you can let go of the idea that there is a right way, because ultimately when we talk about letting go, we're talking about letting go of the assumption that you know what's going on right now. Because when you do that, you can approach this moment with curiosity. And that comes when we make the shift of awareness from this physical being, solely this physical being, to understanding the bigger picture, the collective that we're involved with. Then the unknown is no longer scary. It's no longer, I have to figure out what's going on and what everyone's intentions are. Because again, the ego is personalizing all of this. And the pain body that's constantly searching for hunger, this idea that something is wrong and I am in danger and someone's trying to hurt me, and and they hurt me before and it hurt so bad, that's always looking to perpetuate itself. And so the more that we can be still, that fear can dissipate. Fear cannot withstand the light of presence. If you want to look at awareness being light, like the light bulb going off kind of thing, that fear can only exist in this story. That right now you can be certain of how you are, either in danger or not. If you're in danger, you can remove yourself from danger but only by paying attention to what's going on in front of you, what's going on with you right here and now. So ultimately, all of that comes down to the stories in your mind. And the thing that we are letting go of is judgment. It's the assumptions that we make about the situations, and more importantly, the people that we encounter. That it's not about having amnesia and forgetting all of the things that have happened, including with ourselves, the choices that we have made. But ultimately, when we are unconscious, we have to acknowledge that we will behave out of character, that we cannot. It's similar to mental health. Mental health is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. Your unconsciousness is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. So sometimes when we make certain choices, when we say certain things, we do have to own up to them. But ultimately, they do not become a part of our identity unless we identify by them. And that just means that we've grabbed onto the thing closest to us rather than what was truly there. We are looking to the finger pointing at the moon rather than the moon itself. We've identified by the label. So the idea of the right way to do something or the wrong way to do something assumes that there is something to achieve. It's not about achieving. It's a perpetual practice. And the more that you practice, the more you gravitate towards paying attention rather than trying to figure out how you feel about it.
Yeah. Well, the information that we're talking about, going back to the beginning of the book that says this isn't about information, it's not about trying to convince you of something. It's interesting because we could talk around the topic, trying to point to it, like you said, forever. And what's really beautiful is people send you questions specifically about this topic, about how do I find balance between being present or being spiritual in a world that's materialistic? How can I use the tools of mindfulness to help me with my relationships? Or, there's a lot of questions that people send. And so I encourage, if you have questions around awakening, your own personal awakening, how do I expand my consciousness? How do I be a more peaceful person? How do I invite more presence into my life? Or I'm trying to lose weight and I don't want to judge myself for losing weight because that's the ego. Like, there are all these questions because the ego will create stories, and it can be like a mind maze of trying to figure out, like, is this actually a story? Am I observing myself? Am I still stuck in an unconsciousness? And then people don't trust themselves sometimes on this process till they actually can learn to trust that own essence beyond the identity.
Even though that's the ego too.
Correct. And I do think that is still nice to have someone holds the sign. Yes. Here's a question. And then you hold the sign up and it points in that direction. Like, okay. And then next week, here's another question. Oh, here, let me hold the sign up and it points in this direction. And I find it to be very helpful for our listeners. So if you're not already a part of our online community, it is amazing. I encourage you to join. I will put the information in the show notes, but send Matt your questions. There is a video archive of all these questions and answers that you have gone through. And, one of the questions I'm going to ask here, we have 2 more questions to kind of wrap up our show. The next question is, and I think this is really important because I think we take spirituality and this topic and the meditating Buddha and the meditating man alone in silence, quiet, serious. How can humor be used as a tool for presence? Because Eckhart Tolle talks about seriousness is a symptom of the ego. Absolutely. So how can laughter help us access consciousness?
For me, I found great humor as I learned about space, the universe, astronomy, as opposed to the astrology that I also know about. It's the idea that we are on a rock being hurled through space. And we think that whether or not our coupon is going to work at the self-checkout is important, right?
It's really, really hard. Every time you say that, like I look up at the stars and I look at this and I look at the Hubble telescope and now the James
Webb.
Sorry,
yeah.
It's Jimmy Webb.
Well,
the Jimmy Webb.
Different, yeah.
Jimmy, we'll call him Jimmy for short. How I understand it mentally, but I really don't think that it's actually set in as a realization because it's so big for my human consciousness to understand.
It's scary for the ego. Yes.
It's scary to understand. So I think there might be a block. Like, I don't really want to look at that. I don't know. I'll look into that deeper, but,
humor serves a vital role, though. It really does.
Yes.
Humor serves a vital role in awakening because the ego looks at every situation as dire because this is going to be a part of my story. And I have to make sure that I choose what part of the story I construct, right? The one that I grab a hold of and say, this is mine now. So you're doing this to me again. My identity is now the victim of the thing that you're doing to me. Or I know more than you. And therefore my identity is the person who's smarter than you or wiser than you. All of these things ultimately are done out of great seriousness. But when we realize that the only reason we can hold on to those identities is because we also make the assumption and assume that others will make the assumption about those identities, right? That, well, no, that's not who I'm trying to be, or I'm not that type of person. Why would they say that about me? And all of a sudden our ego is threatened by the perception of others. When we can laugh about it, put these moments into ridiculous terms. A phrase that I use with people all the time is that if I were to call you a dolphin, it doesn't make you grow flippers in a blowhole, right? It's the idea that just because I apply a label to you does not turn you into that thing. It's not some magical spell that I'm casting on you unless your ego is involved. And then it is the most archaic and perfect spell for me to cast on you because the ego is looking for those things. The ego is constantly searching for a new identity or something to add to the identity. And so when we can approach the ego with lightheartedness, not laughing at it, because the ego will grab a hold of that and turn that into an identity really quick too, of, oh, they're just laughing at me. They think they're better than me. They're present all the time, but they're not paying attention to what's going on. They're just in the clouds all the time. They aren't dealing with reality. Reality is hard, right? All of these voices start to talk. But then when we can be still, we can look at that just the same as we watch sports fans in the bleachers. They will literally fight each other over these guys running around on grass, passing a ball back and forth, right? The people have a sign on their lawn different than the sign on the lawn of the person next to them. They will get into physical altercations with each other over this, right? Because this is serious stuff. My ego needs this identity, and I'm willing to fight to the death about it. And many people have.
Or they become paranoid because of what they believe in their head. This is the collective insanity that Eckhart Tolle is talking about.
Right. It's that identification by things that are not your identity and the collective encouragement to do that you need to buy these shoes or this watch or these clothes, or you need to eat at this place or shop at this store. Otherwise, you are not normal. Something's wrong with you. You're weird. You're strange. You aren't married with 2.5 kids and a white picket fence. You don't have 2 jobs that you're supporting yourself by. You don't have the normal thing for people that they're used to seeing in the world around them. And what that does is it makes people pay attention. Why aren't you the same? And that threatens the ego. The ego comes up in them and says, I can't put you in a box. I can't assume that I know who you are, and therefore you're dangerous to me because I can't figure you out. And so when you can step back from that, you can identify that discomfort and realize that you don't need to put them in a box. You only need to pay attention to what they're doing now, because even if this person is dangerous, the only moment in which they can harm you is now, right? Because if you cannot pay attention to what's going on, you'll be in this story of they're going to do this, and you could be paranoid navigating the aisles of the grocery store, making sure that you don't bump into this person and their cart full of bleach. And you don't, because there's a body at home, and I know that's what they're doing, and they're dangerous. I have to watch out for this person. And lo and behold, they come through with their business card that they run a laundromat. You know, you've created this whole story about this danger and reacted with your environment based upon it, with only the assumptions in your mind based upon the past, the stories that you're telling yourself. But when we come into this moment, when we pay attention to what's going on in front of us, we can step back from this need to identify someone as normal or not, dangerous or not, and we can pay attention to everyone equally without the judgment, without the labeling, without needing to fit them in a box. And it doesn't mean that we sit in this ignorance. It's not about that either. Again, our mind serves the role of a tool. It's there to help us through life, not to navigate us through life. A big difference there of being a part of the decision-making versus making the decisions. Big difference. And all we have to do is be the conscious awareness, paying attention to those thought processes as well as what's going on in our environment for us to make a unified collective decision and move forward in a present, conscious, loving way.
When people become more conscious and aware, it does change how they interact, like you say, from day to day. You know, you might have a hunch to do something or not fill out that paperwork this day, or you end up skipping it. And then because of that, you end up missing fees or something. If you start to trust the process of life and life living through you, you do really start to have things line up and people come in and you dodge a bullet. You're like, wow. And you don't really have to think that far ahead. I think it's still important to be strategic in business or in maybe you're planning for the future. But when you're doing it in a present moment and you're feeling out what feels good at that moment, then of course in the future things always change and things might need to pivot, but then you change it in that moment. So I think going back to the moment, the sentiment of using humor, I think humor to me has been more helpful than the seriousness, especially when it comes to comparing myself to you, because I of course love you so much. And then we are awakening partners. This is the term that we started calling each other. And it's beautiful because our label for the definition of awakening partners, because everyone in life can be considered an awakening partner, but the partnership is people that you're in close proximity with, that you have spent a lot of time with in your life, and that make an impact and support your evolution and your consciousness. Life will give you whatever experience is most helpful for the evolution of your consciousness. There it is again, that quote. And that life has given me you and me to you. So we have been this amazing catalyst for each other over and over and over again to bring more awareness in. And for the years of me comparing myself and getting frustrated with myself and being that perfectionist and being that type A and thinking that there's this finish line that I need to get to be a certain space in which the truth is my essence is different than who you are. And my expression of presence in my life may look different than the way you are, because your essence is not my essence. But and then we still have our ego identities. They're still there. They're not gone, and they still serve a beautiful role, and they're fun to play with. We called her Carla the other day, my ego, when she got involved. We're like, let's just call her Carla, because when I see it there, just like Carla got activated on the road today when someone pulled out in front of her, and then she immediately went for a second, then she froze. It's still identifying and creating a character as separate from yourself, but I think it's one step in the direction of observing. Even if you create these different voices. The guest I had on recently, she calls her brain Brenda. Like Brenda does all these things. She doesn't know when to call off work. She works overtime and she doesn't know when to stop. And I thought that was really, really good because it's bringing humor in, and specifically our humor that we use all the time now is based on a character from that show, I Think You Should Leave. The one character that drinks all the wine. And she has this like, I know better than you. I know better than you. So what is the line that she says exactly?
she says, I know that. I'm not stupid. I'm smarter than you.
Yes. A lot of times we just say, I'm smarter than you. Because like whenever I get triggered or you don't do it, you just kind of do it where you make a joke about whatever it is. And then we just start laughing. We're like, yeah, because part of me, and this is what happens, this might be fun to apply in your relationship if you're in a conscious relationship with your partner. Like, you're still going to trigger each other, right? But if you catch yourself in that trigger and you have some sort of character that you can, instead of like, because our ego sometimes doesn't want to say sorry right away. Like, oh my God, I was so unconscious. I was just a, huge, jerk. And I just said that to you. Like right away, the ego is still holding tight. I don't want to apologize to you right in that moment. But instead, I can jump right to humor. I can be like, I know that. I'm smarter than you. And because you know what I'm talking about, that's your cue that you knew that I was completely being unconscious. And then we laugh about it. And I don't believe that we even need to apologize to each other at that time because it's already known. Like, and sometimes I still do if it's necessary or you do to me, but I think it's something that I really like that tool. And I think it's something that every couple who's, conscious and trying to be aware in their relationship about when their identities take over and unintentionally harm the other or attack the other or whatever. I think it's a really good thing to use.
Yeah. And I think consciousness ultimately presents us with the opportunity to dissolve the division of other. The idea that the only reason we had the altercation in the first place was I believe that you were someone different than me, that we're separate, we're not the same in that fundamental sense. And therefore you're the other and I have to protect myself from you, or I have to exert dominance, or I have to prove myself, or, all of these sorts of things. Humor helps us to dissolve all of that and to understand. It essentially is a way for us to let go of the situation, of us to move on, that it's just pay attention and keep going. Don't get distracted by all of the stuff that your mind is telling you about what's going on, even in those altercations, that you can be just like the duck, shake it off and just swim away like nothing ever happened. Yeah. Unless we have a point of, like I said earlier, that being your responsibility, even though it's not your fault, still taking that responsibility. And if you feel, if the other person is hurt, apologize or whatever you feel you need to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing any less present about apologizing, because ultimately you can only truly apologize to someone when you are conscious of what you are doing now.
Yes. So here's another quote from the book. Awareness is the greatest agent for change. And then to recognize one's own insanity is, of course, the arising of sanity. So once you recognize it, your sanity starts to come online. And this is the beginning of healing and transcendence. And then ego is no more than this: identification with form, which primarily means thought forms. Mm-hmm. So those are some other quotes that are popular from the book. The last question I want to go into is this book, A New Earth, is talking about as we each individually awaken, and it is a process, it's a practice, we start to collectively impact everyone around us, and it's a ripple effect. And that's why we have, again, our business, Firefly Hollow, is a conscious business. We're very conscious and aware of who we hire and how we lead and how we together want to evolve and do these types of practices as individual practitioners that make a huge ripple effect to the way we show up for our collective business, the way we show up to our clients, and then the way that we show up in our communities when we go home from work at the end of the day. So same thing with our Conscious Curious Explorers Club. We have wonderful community members that want to be in community together and want to explore all different types of tools that they can continue to crunch on, because our egos just still want to crunch on information. It still wants to buy that next book or try that other class. And that's okay, because it's all these paths lead to home, right? All the roads lead back to awakening. There's no one right or wrong path. So as we collectively awaken, as Eckhart Tolle predicts, what would the world look like 50 years from now? And what changes do you think we'd see in everyday life and technology, anything?
I think that consciousness, inevitably, if we begin to choose love over the fear that we have thus far, that it would not only move us forward as a civilization, but it would move us forward as a species. So a civilization meaning all of these primates that have gotten into these groups and decided that this is reality and this is how things go, and you need to worry about your lives and you need to continually find the thing that's missing out, and we have it. It's for sale. And if you've got that coupon, you remember that at self-checkout. And so if you can realize that that story in and of itself is the thing that keeps us in fear, in stories in our mind, trapped in a space of ego, that the awareness would liberate us from the rat race, as we say in the parlance of our times. And then as a species, it would bring us closer together. Because all you have to do is look at how creatures have evolved over the period of time that they too have been flying through space on this rock. And that ultimately what is available determines how we grow. And so if fear is in our environment, we will adapt to fear. We will identify by these groups that give us the illusion of feeling safe, whether that's our political affiliation, our religion, whether it's our sports team, our ethnicity, where we live, what type of place we live, if we have roommates or our own 1,000-room mansion. We have all of these things that we identify by. And ultimately, if we would realize that those are simply our circumstances, that is simply what's going on a linear, on a third dimensional plane, we could unify our efforts. We would no longer focus on trying to be the best and realize that the best way for us to continue the process of awakening is not by cursing the darkness, but by creating a light. And when we do that, when we choose that as individuals, we present other people the opportunity to do that themselves. We show other people, hey, I'm going to slow down at this intersection because I want to make a turn here. And maybe the car behind you has to slow down now too. Maybe they aren't going to turn. Maybe they're going to keep going straight. But now they've slowed down to realize, hey, there are roads that go off of the path that I'm on. And I have my hands on the steering wheel, not just the gas pedal. So when we can be conscious that we are in control of doing the same thing when we don't pay attention, right? Or we can choose it when we're conscious, but more often than not, we choose the same thing when we are not paying attention. But yet, if we bring conscious awareness to a situation, we not only improve our own lives, but the lives of the people in our environment. And that always ripples out into our world, that we as a singular individual play a huge role in the collective, in helping that collective ego that we talked about earlier, that getting a crack in it, that opening up, us realizing the people who have been the cultural outliers that have always been around for generations and generations, as far back as history goes. There's always the strange person. And ultimately, they don't buy into that collective ego. Sometimes their ego becomes the fact that they are not part of the collective ego, but they also have that opportunity to step back from all of that. And really what it's about is it's the beauty and wisdom of listening to people back before we had modern machinery who were clock makers, that they would spend so much time on each individual tooth of each individual gear, knowing that if any of them was off, it would throw the clock off just a little bit, and that they might not notice it visually looking at the whole thing. But over time, that clock is going to be wrong, right? We can focus on being the most well-formed conscious tooth, being aware of all of the components of us, and then stepping into the situation. Again, not releasing them, not letting them go, not divorcing ourselves from them, not labeling them as bad, being conscious of them, being conscious of who we are right now, even if that means our ego is really pulling on us. Be conscious of it, because if you're aware of where it is, it can't sneak up behind you and convince you that it's you. It cannot become the possessing entity, as Eckhart Tolle puts it. So we can maintain our sovereignty, our awareness, and therefore unify with this moment. It helps us to dissolve the story that we are separate. And suddenly we can start to contemplate the idea that we're made up of molecules, just like all of the air that's around us, just like the chair that I'm sitting on right now, and the floor beneath it, and the dirt beneath that, and the rock beneath that, and the molten core beneath that. It's all the identical same stuff. But we say, this is me. This is the chair, that's the floor, that's the ground, that's the molten core of the planet. We put all of this stuff in smaller and smaller boxes. But when we pay attention, we understand we are a component of this moment, a piece of the puzzle. And suddenly we all are participating rather than trying to fight for an identity that we believe to be ourselves.
Yes. And I really think that if we allow ourselves to mindfully and consciously observe the ego and giving it space to play out in a safe container, I think that might be really, really interesting to use humor, because we still have this human desire that I don't think is going to go away for stories. That's why we like drama, we like movies, we like sitcoms. And if we can be aware consciously of it, the ego still has a beautiful role to play. So if you guys are interested in joining us for this month, if you're listening to the podcast in November of 2024, we're actually reading this book together. You can get it on Audible. You can purchase it anywhere. Local retailer. We have it at the Metaphysical Bookstore here in York, Pennsylvania. New Visions Books and Gifts. You can meet Matt there on Tuesday, Fridays, and Sundays. Chat with him. Ask him your questions about presence directly, mindfulness, and actually also about all the occult and magic information. That's why you have all these books behind you, to represent all of the information, mythology, everything. You just you're a librarian of information. And
I studied it all so I could let it all go.
Yes. Anything you were afraid of, you're like, I'm going to learn about that. Because you want to eradicate the fear with the light of consciousness.
The light of consciousness, because ultimately the ego is always unconscious. The ego cannot be conscious. And if you are conscious, you are not in your ego. If you are unconscious, you are in your ego. And so no matter what ideology you hold to, it's just a perspective. And I had to learn those things, that through the process of shining the light into, well, they say this is real. Is that real? Oh, okay, that's the same. That's just the ego. Is this real? Okay, that's the ego. And ultimately, it was summarized for me in the Course in Miracles, which isn't something I necessarily subscribe to. Again, just another perspective. But the idea that, it's nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God. Because ultimately, what is cannot be threatened. It's already here. You're already here. What are you going to do with it? That's what it's all about. What are you going to do with it right now, right here? And the only way you can do something with it is by paying attention. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, pay attention to the date on your calendar. If you are listening to this in November of 2024, you can read the book with us. Join our online community. You can chat about the book in there. And then we're going to do a live Q&A about the book. Actually, towards the end of the month in November, you can pop in there and see that live Q&A only in the online community. And of course, if you join afterwards, there'll be a recording of it will be in there too. Plus all the other archives of all your mindful moments with Matt. Isn't that cute? Mindful moments with Matt. That's what they're adorable. They're amazing. So I encourage you guys to do that. All right, everyone. Thank you again, as always, and be well until next time, my friends. Thank you for listening to the Mind Body Detox Podcast. If you love this podcast, share it with others and leave us a review. Your reviews help us more than you know and supports us continuing to make episodes and being heard from all over the world. You can also follow the link in our show notes to submit a topic that you would like to hear on the show.